Since the very beginning of my watch collecting hobby, I've been looking for an affordable watch that looks like a Rolex Explorer 2 polar dial. So I was incredibly happy when I saw that Seiko decided to use their SRPG line of Seiko 5 Sports field watches and implement their new NH34 automatic GMT movement in that watch. And even more excited when I saw that for the Japan domestic market, they decided to do a white dial with an orange GMT hand, creating what I think is the perfect affordable alternative to Rolex's Explorer 2 GMT watch. Let's take a look and see if you think the same as well. Hey guys, welcome back to Just the Watch. My name's Dave. I live in Japan and I love to collect affordable watches. And even though my hobby is collecting affordable watches, I certainly have an eye on luxury watches, and I have a list of them that I would love to somehow get my hands on, even though I know I never will. I guess these are true grails for me in the sense that I'm about as likely to own a Rolex Explorer 2 as I am to get my hands on the actual cup that Christ drank from on the night of his crucifixion. So I'm always on the lookout for affordable alternatives to watches like that. Now, when I say an affordable alternative, what I'm not looking for is a one-to-one copy or an homage. And I'm not looking for a watch that is objectively as good as a watch from Rolex or Omega or Patek. Obviously, those watches have a higher level of finishing, manufacturing, exclusivity, rare materials, better movements, things that you can't possibly get in the affordable price range. What I mean by an alternative is something that has a similar style, something that if you liked that expensive watch, this one is going to give you a similar look and feel to it, while also staying true to the brand's unique design and heritage, coming up with something that is different but still very well executed. And that's what I think Seiko has really accomplished here in this watch. I think that fixed 24-hour bezel with black engraved markings paired with a GMT field watch really does reference the Rolex Explorer 2. But even more so, this watch is based on Seiko's own field watch designs with the SRPG series, and a GMT hand that also directly references Seiko's own design, language, and heritage. So with that said, let's check out the SBSC009 JDM edition. What Seiko has done here is take their very popular SRPG line of Seiko 5 field watches and added a GMT function to them. But because of the way that Seiko has implemented the GMT function, this really changes the visual look of the watch, and I think it looks amazing. I think there's two obvious ways you could have implemented the GMT function on this watch. The first would be to simply take the inner 24-hour scale that's normally used for the military time and turn that into a GMT scale. So you could have those 24-hour markings on the dial and leave pretty much everything else exactly the same. But Seiko went the extra mile here and they put the 24-hour markings on the bezel instead, which I think adds a ton of character to the watch. And they did a great job finishing this bezel so that it really elevates the entire watch, making it look like a much more expensive watch than it is. It features vertical brushing that gives it kind of a sunburst effect with a detailed engraved 24-hour scale that's filled with crisp black paint. And in conjunction with this new bezel, they've chosen a really interesting and kind of cool 24-hour indicator. The tip of the GMT hand features this shovel-shaped indicator that Seiko uses as the second hand on a lot of their watches, including the Marine Master 300 and a bunch of their vintage watches. And I actually really like that. I think it's a cool nod to Seiko's history and heritage to use something that is very distinctly Seiko. Even if it is a second hand from a lot of their other watches, I didn't find it confusing at all. It's oversized and on this colorway is done in a bright orange that I think just looks great with the rest of the design. Of course, powering this watch is Seiko's 4R34 movement, their affordable GMT movement that they came out with just a couple of years ago that's had such a tremendous impact on the watch industry as a whole. This is now the most affordable Japanese automatic GMT movement on the market and one of the most affordable automatic GMTs that has ever been created. It's based on Seiko's 4R36 movement, which is a proven, rugged, and reliable movement with decent accuracy. But in this case, rather than getting a day date, you're getting a GMT with a date. And the GMT complication in this watch is what many refer to as a caller's GMT or an office GMT. This means to set the time, you bump the crown out to the third position as usual to set the local hour and minute. And then by pushing it to the second position, you can set either the date or the GMT. The GMT hand can be advanced in 1 hour increments so that it's always synced with the minute hand. and rotating the crown in the opposite direction will allow you to quick set the date. One drawback to this movement is that it does increase the height of the case by 1 millimeter. The standard non-GMT version of this watch comes in at 13 millimeters, but this new one with the GMT function is now 14 millimeters thick. And that sounds pretty thick, especially for a watch that only has a 39 millimeter case. And normally for me, this would be kind of a concern, but Seiko has done a pretty incredible job of hiding that height so that it doesn't look or really feel like a 14 millimeter watch at all. That 14 millimeter height is divided between the exhibition case back, the mid case, the bezel, and the crystal, which visually creates this kind of stepped effect whereby none of those elements seem overly large, so that when you look at it, you'd never guess that it was 14 millimeters tall. In fact, before measuring, I had just assumed it was closer to 12 millimeters. So if you're concerned about the watch being overly thick, I don't think that's as big a deal as it might seem on paper. And it didn't bother me personally. Now, other than simply tacking on a GMT function to this watch, there have been a couple of other changes. For one, you're getting an upgraded bracelet here, which features solid links and solid end links, and this is a big upgrade from the bracelet that was included on the previous version of this watch. I think Seiko wants to make these GMT watches feel like a premium version of their Seiko 5 line. When they did the GMT version of the 5KX, they did the same thing, and including an upgraded Jubilee bracelet. On this field watch version, they've gone with a 5-link style bracelet. I say 5-link style because each link is just a single solid piece of steel. It's not 5 individual links, but they are solid, they look good, and they're nicely finished. And even more importantly, Seiko includes solid end links with this watch. Until the release of these Seiko 5 GMTs, every Seiko 5 that came with a bracelet came with hollow end links, which have a tendency to loosen up over time and cause a little bit of rattling and loose connection between the bracelet and the watch. So it's really cool to see upgraded end links here on these ones. One thing that hasn't changed is the clasp. This is still a pressed metal clasp, which is very typical of what you see from Seiko in this price range, but a step down from the milled clasps that are typically found in micro brands in this price range. But that said, the functionality of this clasp is perfectly fine. It features a flip lock and dual push button deployment. It has 4 holes for micro adjust and is very comfortable on the wrist. But overall, I really like this bracelet. I would definitely be purchasing it with the bracelet option. Style-wise, it's a great pairing to this watch. It also allows you to take full advantage of that 100 meters of water resistance if you want to take this watch swimming. And it's of sufficient quality that I would very much enjoy wearing it on the bracelet. And of course, if you want to mix things up, you can always put this watch on a strap. It features drilled lugs, so it's fairly easy to take the bracelet off and to add a different strap. And I think you can have a lot of fun mixing up different straps on this watch. Field watches tend to be one of the most versatile watches when it comes to straps. They look great on NATO straps or on leather straps. And I think white dialed watches in particular really give you a lot of versatility when it comes to strap options. Let's focus our attention on the dial of this watch because I think there's a couple of things to note here. On this JDM version, the SBSC009, you're getting a stark white dial that has a light texturing to it. It kind of reminds me a little bit of powdered snow, which I think is kind of a cool look. And for the hour markers, you have simple 12-hour Arabic markings. Now these markings are raised off of the dial, but I don't think they're individually applied. If you look down at macro, you can see that the sides are white just like the rest of the dial, but the top has been painted with a metallic paint. And this gives adequate contrast against that white dial. In fact, in many lighting situations, those markers are going to look black, but when they catch the light, you get a bright reflection that does look cool, but my preference would have been for these actually to just be black markers to maximize the contrast there. Another change to the dial that I would have liked to have seen is the removal of those 24-hour military time markings on the inner section of the dial. Those 24-hour markings are a hallmark of military field watches, allowing you to quickly read the time in the 24-hour format instead of the 12-hour format. But when you have those markings on a GMT watch, it can be a little bit confusing as you're not sure whether to read the GMT time against those 24-hour markings or the 24-hour markings on the bezel. And I feel like in this case, it just makes everything too busy. So I wish Seiko would have dropped those on this version. On a positive note, I really like the date integration at 3 o'clock. It's positioned precisely where you would expect the number 3 to be on the dial, so it maintains the symmetry pretty well. And you have a silver border that matches the silver color of the rest of the markers, making it a very unobtrusive implementation of this 3 o'clock date. One area where this watch disappoints a bit is with the lume. It's actually weaker than the original non-GMT version. Now, when it comes to the non-GMT versions of this watch, Seiko has done a lot of different styles. I previously reviewed one that featured bicolor lume, which I thought was really cool. Unfortunately, Seiko did not decide to keep that lume formulation here. Instead, you're just getting a uniform kind of bluish green color. For the hour markers, you're getting very small lume plots going around the outside of the dial. And while those markers fade out fairly quick because of the small size, the thick pencil-shaped hour and minute hand allows for much more lume to be applied there, and so those last decently long. When I ran this through my J-score test, it came out with a score of 5, which is pretty low. And again, that's in large part because those markers are so small and they fade out so quickly. But even still, the previous non-GMT version that I tested had a score of 9. So this is a pretty big step down. That said, the lume is still not terrible. The hour and minute hand are visible for a long time in the dark, which will allow you to still read the time, albeit not as easily as you could if you could also see the hour markers. And this will still outperform many field watches from more expensive brands like Hamilton. Now, there was one disappointing thing about this specific watch, and that's that on the 9 o'clock marker, there's a small dab of something. And I didn't even notice it until after I reviewed the macro footage of the watch, but now that I know it's there, I can see it with the naked eye under certain lighting conditions. I'm not sure exactly what it is. It could be a small blemish in the application of the paint or a drop of some oil or something, but it's obviously something that shouldn't happen from a major brand like Seiko. And while I've bought and reviewed many Seiko watches myself, I've never experienced any quality control issues personally, but I know that many people have, and this is something that Seiko has kind of been developing a reputation for. For this specific issue, I'm not sure exactly how I'll handle it. It doesn't really bother me that much, but I might try and send it through Seiko's warranty program and get it fixed to see what they'll do. But that's something that I definitely wanted to highlight in this review. So when we take a look at this watch as a whole, you're getting a lot of significant upgrades over the previous non-GMT version of it, but there are a few trade-offs with the weaker lume and the thicker case. But even with those trade-offs, I'm still very happy with this watch. I love that Seiko is doing more versions of their Seiko 5 GMT. This now gives us 2 affordable GMT options from Seiko, one a dive style and one a field watch. And personally, I'm much more a fan of field watches. I also like the smaller case size of this watch. So for me, this would definitely be my pick over the 5KX style GMTs that Seiko has released. But I think that's largely going to be a personal preference. And it's great that Seiko is now offering these different options to people who have different preferences in styles like this. Now let's talk about the price, because I think that's something that's going to be changing a lot over the next year or so, as always seems to happen when Seiko releases new watches. This JDM version comes in at a retail price of 59,400 Japanese yen, which at current exchange rates is right around $400, and is also comparable to the US retail price of $430 for the US market models. Now, a couple of years ago, the idea of getting a GMT watch for around $450 from Seiko would have sounded like an insane bargain. But with the release of Seiko's 4R34 movement and the unbranded NH34 movement that's available to micro brands, we are seeing a huge amount of micro brand watches that are using this exact same movement, giving you better specs at this same price point. Notably, this watch does not include a sapphire crystal. It features Hardlex, which is Seiko's proprietary mineral, which will scratch eventually. You're also getting that kind of cheaper clasp, and you're not getting a screw down crown. And there are a number of micro brand GMTs that will give you all these features at around the same cost. But I don't think this watch is going to stay at that price point. In fact, if you look at those dive style GMTs that Seiko released about 2 years ago, those have dropped down to around $350, and that's where I expect these ones to settle as well. Most likely over the next year or two, Seiko's going to be releasing new colorways for this watch. Production will increase and you'll see more of these getting out into the market. And as that happens, the price is going to drop as well. And when these get down to around $350, I think they're going to be a pretty amazing buy. So if you're really cost conscious, I would wait for that. But even if you want to spend the $430 on these at the retail, it's still a pretty decent buy to get a watch like this from Seiko, which is a brand with a great heritage, a great reputation, and I think a great visual style that they've put in here as well. All right, guys, that's going to wrap it up for the review today. Like I said, this white colorway is a JDM version, so if you want that one, you're going to have to hunt around for it, probably look at some exporting companies that ship from Japan. I was lucky enough to just get mine on Japanese Amazon because I live in Japan. However, there are different colorways available in other regions. I think the standard ones that they released with is a black dial and then another one that has a black case with a leather strap. If you're interested in the black dial, make sure you're following Shane over at Relative Time because he got his hands on that one. So I'll be curious to see his review there. But that's going to wrap it up from me for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.